Hi, folks. Thank you for joining. So, as I mentioned about a minute ago, we're waiting for people to trickle in. I just wanted to remind people that if you have not already gotten your Wonda Pro access, please do that right now. So, I will set up the agenda. So, we're going to start with a bit of an introduction. Then, we're going to talk about the components of AI powered simulations. We're going to go through the components, and as you'll see, storyline, character, and assessment are just some of the components. And location is another component which we won't be delving into today, but I will give a shout out to that. And I will be jumping back and forth between the platform and this presentation, so please bear with me. So for all of those who are new to the webinar series, thank you for joining us. I am Ashley Etemadi, Chief Learning Officer at Wonda. And for those who have been along this ride over the summer in our summer webinar series, I'd like to go back to the first conversation that we had with Dr. Chris Dede. And this is a direct quote from the session. Dr. Chris Dede mentioned that very important in developing learning environments is staying true to the actual validity of how things work rather than making them magical. So this is about creating authentic learning experiences for learners. And so the question that we're going to be delving into today, which is a question that Dr. Chris Dede mentioned, is how do you keep the immersion and the engagement but have the situation be authentic? So we're going to answer that question over the course of this workshop. So the components of simulations are fourfold. So the main components, specifically in Wonda, so if anyone has experiences with creating AI-powered simulations outside of Wonda, it might look different. But in the Wonda platform, there are four main components. And the first one is the storyline. It is probably the most important component because it is the arc of the learning experience. So this looks at the learning goals. This looks at what do we want to achieve. And it's entirely mapping out the scenario and storyboarding and looking at how does the learning goals and how do we map it backwards to achieve what we want to achieve with the goals, with the objectives. The second one is the location. So the location is really important when you want to deliver an authentic learning experience. So in the case of Wonda, the location is a 360 space in which the AI character and the learner find themselves together. So what we'll be looking at is a location that's related to the performance context. And that's what we typically recommend for creating authentic scenarios, is making it as close to the performance context as possible. The third component is the character, and this includes the character prompt. So the character is an AI, a generative AI powered avatar with which the learner will be interacting. And in the course of a program, for example, there could be multiple characters, but today we'll delve into just one character in one simulation. And the fourth component is the assessment. So this is the rubric against which the large language model will be providing automated feedback to learners based on their performance. And this will be the assignment at the end for anyone who's interested in joining us in a follow-on workshop. So the first component is the storyline. So the storyline starts off with what are the learning goals of the overall program and the individual simulations within the program. And I'll delve into two examples in the coming slides. And this is a very basic framework that we've developed called the 5 S's of defining a storyline. So the first S is the skills, and the skills include what skills should the learners be able to display once the simulation or the program has wrapped up. And what do we want them to be able to display during the simulation as well? The second S is the student journey. So what is a step-by-step experience for the learner? Is the learner going to be reflecting? If they're going to be reflecting, what kinds of questions is that going to be? Are they going through 3 simulations? Are they going through 4? And what is each simulation going to cover? And the third is the setting. In what virtual space will the experience occur? Is this going to be in a hospital? Is this going to be in an office, in a conference room, in a classroom, etc.? Then the fourth is the time span. How long should the experience last? Is this a 10-minute experience, 15 minutes? Do we need 1 hour, etc.? And then the last one is what I call the AI stars, but these are really just the AI characters. What characters are needed? What is their personality? What is their identity? And how do they fit into this storyline? So as a first example, this is a hypothetical scenario that I created for a multi-party negotiation. So what are the skills? It's managing conflicting interests in this multi-party negotiation to arrive at a solution that works for all stakeholders. Then the student journey is the learner starts with an introduction, simulation to discuss the case and prepare for the 3 conversations that they're going to have with each of the parties of the committee involved in this multi-party negotiation. Then they go on to having 3 separate simulations, one with each party in the committee, in which they're going to uncover the interests of that party through a question and answer scenario. Then the next part of the simulation is going to be, the journey is going to be that learners summarize their learnings from the meetings and construct a proposal that might work for all of the parties. Then in the last experience or simulation, the learner is going to present the proposal to the head of the committee, who then might have the chance to answer some questions. So the setting is, steps 1 and 3, in which the learner is going to be discussing the case and summarizing their learnings. That's going to be in a conference room with maybe a mentor. And then steps 2 and 4, which include all of the conversations with the committee members, that'll be in the respective offices of those committee members. I estimate about 2 hours for this experience, about 15 to 20 minutes per simulation. And then in terms of the AI stars, I envision 3 characters, the 3 party members in the committee, and then 1 person who serves as a mentor or guide across the storyline. So in the case of today's workshop, we're going to be working with a conflict resolution case. So in terms of the skills are implementing the nonviolent communication framework for a workplace conflict. And we're actually going to test the prompt and look at what does it look like when we change it from a nonviolent communication framework to a difficult conversations framework, which was developed at Harvard. Then the student journey is going to be the learner is guided through a step-by-step inquiry-based process whereby they reflect on a recent workplace conflict and are prompted to apply the NVC method to the situation. The setting is a casual cafe to build confidence and rapport with learners, and then the time span is going to be about 15 minutes, and there's 1 character, Alex, who's the career coach. So I'm now going to jump into the platform, and if everyone wants to do the same on their side. So here we see the Wonda Pro window. And then here at the bottom, I don't know if everyone sees my mouse, but at the bottom right-hand corner, you see the messenger. So if at any point during this workshop, you have technical questions, for example, you don't know which button to press, or maybe something is not loading fast enough, please click on that messenger button at the bottom right-hand corner of the window, and someone on our technical team will respond to your inquiry right away. If you do have any questions on the design of the simulation or questions about, how would you approach this in your own setting, please feel free to post those questions in the chat directly. So here we're going to start off by clicking on New Program. And then the new program will come to this, so we'll be able to choose a template. And today session, we're going to use the blank template. And then this is a blank program template. We're going to start off by clicking on New Simulation. And we're going to click on Conflict Resolution. To just briefly give a shout out to setting, or what we call location in the platform. So location is, or setting is, the 360 environment in which the simulation is going to take place. So here are just some examples that are out of the box in the Wonda platform. And you can make those changes on your end with out of the box settings. But just for folks who are interested in, can you create my own setting, or can I develop one that's more representative of the hospital that I work at or the university that I'm in? Yes. So you can either use Skybox AI, which is what we use to develop 360 environments, or you can also develop one on your end and we can integrate that into the platform. So now we'll talk about character. For the character, I always talk about what personas of the AI characters are being used in the program or in the simulation. And here are some things that need to be thought about. So with this, we typically recommend folks to either interview characters or use existing characters or personas that they use in their curriculum, so as not to recreate the wheel, and also to create a more cohesive learning experience for learners. But some attributes that I think are especially important are the name, the age, the ethnic, racial background, the physical appearance. For example, we were working on a project in which, we needed to create people that were authentic for that specific country. Social history, where has the person been? What is their job? What is their family environment like? What are their goals? What are their interests? What's their primary language? So for example, is it English? Is it French? Is it Spanish? And then accent and voice is another important one. So I want to give a shout out to Ready Player Me, which is the platform that we integrate with, and we'll actually spend 5 minutes right now designing our own characters. And I'll walk you through how to do that. And that's through a Ready Player Me integration. And then for accent and voice, I want to give a shout out to 11 Labs. So today you'll also be able to test different accents and voices. And what I wanted to point out is if there's a particular accent or voice that you want integrated into the platform but is not offered currently, please go on 11 Labs, and Ellie will post the website in the chat. Go to 11 Labs, test out the different voices and accents there, and feel free to shoot us an email, and we'd be happy to integrate it into the platform to create a more authentic experience for you all. So I will now revert back to the platform. So just as a heads up, we'll be doing a preview of the simulation that we have. So here we have the simulation. So we have the main information. As I mentioned, this is the location or the setting. And if after this session you all are interested in going about and changing the background, feel free to choose from some of the media that we've uploaded. And then for this session specifically, we'll be working on the character. So first off, I recommend that everyone launch the preview.
Hello and welcome to my office. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Alex, and how are you?
I'm glad to hear you're doing well. I'm doing great, thank you for asking. I'm here to support you today. Is there anything specific on your mind that you'd like to discuss?
So I'd recommend spending 1 minute having an example conversation with Alex so that you know kind of what does the typical flow of the conversation look like for this specific simulation. And then I'll give folks about 2 minutes to customize the character name, the language that is not spoken by the avatar, but the language that will be spoken by the learner. So if folks want to adjust this to Spanish speakers or Italian, you can change the language to Spanish or Italian. So this is spoken language is the language that is spoken by the learner. And then here you can change the accent that is used by the avatar. And then here you can change the character's intro message. If you want to say, for example, hello, hello, it's great to see you again. Oh, how are you doing today? Or you could say, so how are you doing since we last spoke? And then you can preview the accent here.
Hello, it's great to see you again. So how are you doing since we last spoke?
And I will give folks until the 23 mark to make those changes on your end. And then we'll click next and move on to the appearance where everyone will be able to design their own AI character. And another thing I wanted to mention as folks are testing out the prompt is that you can also expand the window if you want to be able to see Alex more in a more immersive space. As people are finishing up with their voice and character's intro message, I also wanted to say that in a past experience that we created, we actually had an avatar speaking English with a French accent. So that's also possible. And we'll now move on to next. So here, this is the integration with Ready Player Me. So folks can choose from an existing library of avatars that exist, or you can create a new avatar. So Ready Player Me in this integration produces an avatar for you straight off the bat. But you can go here at the top and change it by gender. You can also change the size of the person. You can also change the facial features, eye color, etc. And you can also change hairstyle. And then something that I wanted to mention on clothing. So currently, these are the options for clothing, and there are going to be additional ones added over the coming months. So we will move on now to the prompt. And I wanted to show, before I go into prompting and the ins and the outs, do's and the don'ts, and best practices, I wanted to show you all what the prompt looks like. So there's a few components here that are important to point out. So one is this title. And so this is kind of the category title. And this is important because it directs the large language model to understand specifically what is under this category. So for example, personality now knows, okay, everything that you're talking about here is related to personality. Or for example, if you want the large language model to know who the learner is and what are the characteristics of the learner. For example, they might be a medical student with 3 years of experience in medical school, and they want to specialize in rheumatology once they graduate, et cetera, you can define that also as a specific category so that the large language model knows, okay, these characteristics or these personality traits are related to the learner and not to me or what I'm supposed to display. And then, of course, this is the full description written out in text for each category. And then, just as a side note, this is also the plain text version. If folks are used to working with Wanda previously, this is probably what you saw, which is what is sent to the large language model. So now I will jump into kind of what does prompting look like. So there are 4 main components to the character prompt. And the first one is the role. So this is who is the AI character. And this focuses on the personality, the backstory, and this is what you can pull from using existing characters that are in your coursework. The second component is the context. So why is the AI character here? And who is the AI character speaking with? It's the learner. Maybe what are the learner's attributes or characteristics? Why is the learner here? What are the goals that need to be achieved in this scenario? And what is the scope? For example, it could be, the purpose of this simulation is for the learner to have a reflection on an activity they just did in the class. And this is kind of the activity they did. These are some areas where learners typically struggle on the activity, etc. Then the third component is the task. So what the AI character is here to do. So it outlines instructions for how to carry out the conversation with the learner and maybe what the AI character should and should not do. And of course, this should always align with the learning goals. And we will jump into that in just a second. And the fourth component is the knowledge base. So what does the AI character know? So for example, as everyone knows, large language models have access to a broad repertoire of information that exists on the internet. And so for learning purposes, you might want to be focusing on a specific framework, as we'll see today. For example, nonviolent communication versus difficult conversations. And so if you want it to focus on nonviolent communication, then you should give it that knowledge base versus if you want it to focus on difficult conversations. Otherwise, it's just going to choose and it's going to be more generic. And so it's very important to define certain terms for the large language model. So it's operating on a definition that you want it to be operating on, that you give it frameworks of interest or methodologies of interest so that it knows what to be pulling from and prioritize that over the breadth of information that's on the internet. So with regards to the third component, which was the task, here are some common prompting approaches. And apologies for all of the words on this slide, but I hope it is very informational. So the first part is kind of the definition of the approach and what the approach is. So the three common approaches are, the first one is discussion steps, and I'll delve into what that means. The second one is if-then statements, and the third one is conditions or conditional statements. So the first category is discussion steps of an approach, and this approach is when you outline step by step how the conversation will unfold. For example, if you say, first, review the privacy policy with the learner and ask if they have any questions. Second, have the learner summarize the framework. Third, ask the learner to present one question they have on the module material. As you'll see in the prompt that we're about to work with, it takes a discussion step approach. So times when this approach is relevant is when there are when you want to have a specific and controlled journey for the learner. For example, when you want the AI character to be an interviewer, a reflection partner, a coach, or a mentor. And I present these use cases, but these are not comprehensive. And for example, I put mock patient in if-then statements. But for example, you might use a discussion step approach for a mock patient if it aligns with the learning goals that you have. If you want to have a very specific and controlled journey, and if you want, for example, the mock patient to be dictating the conversation rather than the learner or the medical student. Another thing I want to note here is that a combination of these approaches can be used for the prompt. So for example, you could use discussion steps and if-then statements. So for example, you could say, first, review the privacy policy with the learner. If the learner does not understand X component, then do X, or get angry, have some sort of emotion, or etc. You can also combine if-then statements with conditions and conditions with discussion steps, etc. So there are multiple approaches that you can use or combinations of approaches. So if-then statements are when you stipulate reactions to specific moments in a discussion. And it could be reactions in terms of information delivery or emotions, etc. So an example would be, this is from a template that I created with a mock patient for a social work scenario, but it said, if they ask you if there should be someone else in the conversation, then say that you'd like your oldest son to be looped in, etc. And when you would use if-then statements in particular is when you want there to be branching scenarios. So for example, if you want the learner to be directed in one direction, if they, if the AI character takes it in that direction, or for example, if the student says one thing, then it gets directed into one scenario. If the student says another, there's another reaction. And this would also be used, for example, if you want the learner to guide the interaction and then the AI character to have very specific reactions. And we'll go over kind of what's the difference between conditions and if-then statements. And this might be, as I mentioned, for a mock patient scenario. The third prompt approach would be conditions. So this is where you don't necessarily have specific discussion steps or if-then statements, but rather interests or conditions that should be considered within the range of success. So, for example, this comes out of a negotiation scenario that we developed, but it says, do not allow the learner to quit the job. You can accept any deal that follows these conditions. It is less than 350K, etc. And when you would use a conditions approach would be when you want the outcome to be very open-ended, or when you want the learner to focus on navigating complexity and building adaptability in scenarios that maybe there isn't one right direction that you want to take them in. And you want to see more kind of which direction they're going to take it. And you want the LLM to have the ability to respond in different ways to the way that the learner is navigating the conversation. And conditions, I've used it in negotiation, or when you have a counterparty negotiator, or also in a mock patient scenario. So do's of character prompting, and I'll go through this really quickly because we'll also share this recording and the presentation with folks who join this workshop, and so you'll have access to this. But refer to the AI character as you, not I, and the learner as student or learner. As I mentioned, categorize the prompt into sections. Naming them is important for signaling to the large language model. Shorter prompts are more effective because the large language model has to sift through less information. So please keep them concise. uh, specifically define underlying assumptions or specific knowledge. As I mentioned, if you're operating under a specific definition of ethical decision making, make that known in the prompt. And then limit to a specific language in the prompt. Don'ts for prompting. Do not have the AI character change roles midway through a simulation. And so that's very important. So you can't have it necessarily go from being an interviewer to a career coach. It increases the chance of hallucinations extensively. And then also on that note is if you want it to have a completely different conversation, if the student navigates, for example, if the student makes a first statement and you want it to have a completely different conversation and branch completely differently based on initial conversations, I would actually create a completely separate simulation for that because it also increases chances of hallucination. Do not add time limits to the prompt. So the large language model is not tracking time, even though Wonda does. So for example, don't say stop responding to the learner after 2 minutes, but rather you should time the learning experience using sample conversations. And do not prompt about the accent, as the AI character doesn't know about the voice and the accent that it's using, at least currently. And do not assume that the AI character knows about the background. So any physical context that you want to be included, please include that in the prompt. And another important note is do not add links to prompts, as link searches are not currently available. So for the prompting exercise, we're going to be jumping back into the platform, and we're going to be changing the nonviolent communication framework, which is focused on 4 components: observing without judgment, expressing feelings, identifying needs, and making clear, respectful requests, which is the current prompt that's in the simulation, to a difficult conversations framework, which is by Stone, Patton, and Heen at Harvard, which focuses on summarizing what happened, expressing feelings, and then discussing how the issue affects each person's self-image and sense of competence. If folks are interested in, trying out the nonviolent communication framework more extensively and having a conversation on that to see exactly how the conversation changes, you can also go back and add another simulation later on after this workshop and test out the conversation fully. So for the workshop right now, I'm going to go back into the prompt. So the character prompt here. And of course, there are 4 categories: background, personality, discussion steps, and important details. For this exercise, we're just going to be changing the personality and the discussion steps. So here in the personality, we have a nonviolent communication mentioned, number 4, and number 5. And it mentions that Alex's coaching philosophy focuses on the NVC method. So we're going to actually change Alex's coaching philosophy to the difficult conversations method. So Ellie is going to, or actually, I can post the changes that we're going to make. So in the personality section, we're going to change 4 and 5. And and Ellie just posted 4 and 5 in the chat. The difficult conversations method, that's 4. And then this is 5. I think it got cut off because it was a long message. So I just posted 5 in the chat as well. So make those edits. So you'll just delete 4 and 5 and add the text that I just posted. And then for discussion steps, we're also going to be making changes here. So for discussion steps, On number 3, we have identify conflicts. Ask open-ended questions to uncover any conflicts the person is currently experiencing. Dig deeper to understand the nature. So instead, we're going to be focusing around summarizing what happened, which is the first step in the difficult conversations framework. So folks copy paste that into the discussion steps for number 3. And then for number 4, propose a resolution method. So here in the prompt, it focuses on proposing potentially the nonviolent communication framework. But we're going to change that to proposing the difficult conversations framework. And then number 5, we're also going to change the repertoire of questions that the large language model is suggested to access. And that's further down right here, number 5, ask questions to understand the conflict. And then for number 8, which has the AI character suggesting the NVC method again, we are going to actually have it suggest the difficult conversations method. Once folks have made all of these changes, I'm going to give everyone about 2 minutes to have a conversation again with Alex or whatever you've named your character now. And you can do that by refreshing here.
Hello. It's great to see you again. So how are you doing since we last spoke?
And if folks want to hold this button to talk, you can also press on the space bar and you can also type.
That's true. I'm here to engage in conversation and help you with any conflicts you might be facing. What would you like to discuss today?
I will move on now to the assessment. So for the assessment, I'm going to do a preview of what it looks like, and then we'll talk about what the quote-unquote homework assignment is for folks. But the assessment has, of course, a title and a general description, and then similar to the prompt for the character, the prompt for the assessment also is broken out into what we call criteria. So rather than thinking of it as a formal assessment, I usually think of it as a feedback report. So, and I will show folks what it looks like for those who haven't seen an example yet. But very similar, it comes with a title and then a description which outlines, what to look for. And so you could keep it generic. For example, polite and professional tone is fairly generic. You could also make it extra specific and say, for example, in the case of negotiation that I work on a lot, you could say, did the student, was the student threatening to leave the job? And if they do, then you could say, that comes with a lower point value. And the points are assigned here. So min score, max score, so you can define what you want that to look like. But you could say essentially, you could go as specific as, if they requested additional days off, which they were not supposed to request for, then, ding them some points on their feedback report. And then you can also give further instructions on how to do the evaluation. So now I will discuss kind of what the assignment looks like. So it's to gather 5 to 10 conversational logs by testing the simulation that we just edited. And to do that, you would click launch in the platform. So here I show that button. You click launch and then you would see what the learner typically sees, except the learner would not see that edit button unless they are invited as a collaborator to the simulation or the program. Then you have this end conversation button, which is grayed out until you've exchanged at least 5 messages. And that is done by design because the feedback report will not provide substantial input if you haven't had enough conversation with the AI character. And then once you are done with the conversation and want to receive your feedback, you would click on the end conversation button. If you want to review the reports that you've received, the compilation of all of them, or for example, if you want to test this simulation with learners in your organization, then you are welcome to do so and click on reports to see the reports of the learners that have been generated. And then, for example, if you see the reports and you think, that's not the right feedback that I wanted them to receive. I wanted them to receive feedback that's more like X. And then you can make those edits in the assessment criteria by clicking on this edit button. And then you can, run the reports again. You can also review the conversational logs right here by clicking on sessions. And I will show that in the platform as well. So for example, once we have our everything done, we click save, and then it gets generated in our program, in which case we can click on reports, sessions to review all the logs. See, I just created this log, and then we can also go back to overview and click on edit to edit the assessment criteria and run the reports again. And here you could click on share to receive all of the link information if you want to share it with learners. And you can also see that link right here, share simulation. If you want to duplicate it because you want to make tweaks, you can also do that as well. And as I mentioned, you can start a new simulation and click on conflict resolution. Again, if you want to try out the nonviolent communication framework approach and to see how they vary, how the conversations vary. I will open it up to Q&A. Another thing I wanted to point out is this is the first step. So play testing and doing the initial round of prompts for a simulation is the first step in getting started. The second step is creating an entire program. So stringing together a couple of simulations to create an entire experience for learners. And the third step is deploying. So deploying with learners, getting their feedback more formally, and incorporating that feedback before you deploy it more broadly. And then the last step is I'll go back here. So the last step is once you manage multiple programs. So I'll show folks what that looks like in the Wonda platform. So here I have this new blank template program, but I've been building other programs as well. And so then you can have a suite of programs. Our next session is with Bernie Burke at the University of College Dublin, Graduate School of Business at the Smurfit School. And she will be presenting on Making the Leap, which is a framework that was developed at Smurfit and around employability development. And the host of our session will be Alan Todd. And so we recommend folks to sign up. We'll also, if for anyone who is registered for email updates, you'll also receive it in an email form as well, so you can register there. I want to thank everyone for joining the session. I hope this was helpful. I hope this is just an introduction, and for folks who are just getting started, for those who want to dig more deeply into the ins and the outs of prompting and want more guidance, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. I'd be more than happy to support in any way that I can. And yeah, we look forward to folks developing more programs and more simulations. And we'll also be launching more templates in the coming weeks. So be on the lookout for that. And until August 8th, we hope that you all have a great rest of the month. Take care.